All right, everybody, back again for a new video. This one's going to be dealing with ideas and seeking advice on ideas, which was kind of the one of the inspirations for starting and doing these videos in the first place, because I kind of become a bit disillusioned with the message forums and subreddits and so forth when it came to getting advice and further input on ideas and whatnot, and as well as what I saw a lot of the posts being made up of a lot of people that were asking advice on ideas that they'd barely spent any time actually working on, and basically just throwing out, kind of like a 1 or 2 line generic concept and expecting to have other people do all the heavy lifting for them and expand on this idea instead of actually putting in the effort beforehand so that they can get the most out of the advice of others. And you also got to remember that these forums are not chock full of highly successful authors, at least in the mainstream, which doesn't necessarily discount all of the opinions there, but you have to, they're kind of like armchair experts like me, but I don't have, the ego that, and, that sort of thing, that I try to be more self-deprecating and not take myself too seriously, because like I said, I try to be honest with myself when it comes to where I'm at in my own writing. I'm not trying to put myself out there as being the final authority on anything. So yeah, basically, what I'd like to get through to the audience, those of you listening, more than anything else, is how to approach asking advice, and even, with your own brainstorming of ideas. Because I see a lot of people going on these forums, and basically it's like they're formulating their question almost in a way that they're trying to get permission to do something. It's like they're saying, is it okay to do this? Is it okay to do that? What's the best way to do this? What's the, what's the worst way to do this? And these are all questions that can be answered or summed up in, well, what is the context of which these ideas are going to take place? Because, people don't want to obviously make beginner mistakes, and they, avoid, cliches and, tropes and whatnot, or certain, assuming they're the one and the same. And I'll do a video on cliches and tropes, and expand upon that a little bit. But yeah, my advice would be to formulate your questions and explore your own ideas using the notion of kind of a cost benefit, I guess. What are the positives and negatives of including something in a story, of changing a character, name, or changing a part of the storyline, or having a certain type of character. Don't go online or seeking advice asking permission if it's okay, because there's most likely going to be a situation where, almost definitely, unless you were coming up with something incredibly insulting to people, or something just so far out there that, you'd probably never get anybody interested in it. There's always a context and probably an example that can be provided by a published author in which this hypothetical situation or idea was executed and, didn't get a huge amount of backlash, and, it didn't well enough to, to sell books. And that's seems to be, like I said, a huge majority of a lot of the questions are how to, to deal with writer's block. And the next one even more popular question is, is this a good idea? Or, and like I said, you don't need to ask permission, or should I do this or should I not do this? Focus on what are the positive aspects, or how can it benefit the story, and what are the detriments, and how can it affect the story in a certain way? Because if you choose to do one thing, you're obviously forsaking, other options that may have a different effect on the story as a whole. So like I said, you could take setting, for example. What if I want to write a fantasy novel And I can either place it, in a contemporary society like our own, or I can, go with more of the traditional medieval Europe or medieval Britain setting, or I could maybe go even further back to, a time that's more, akin to, Rome or ancient Greece, or, maybe, an ancient dynasty in China, or, ancient Egypt, or Mesopotamia, or something like that. And you have to weigh the values and the positives and negatives of all of them. That should be your first, uh, you know, your first way of kind of brainstorming this idea, and trying to solidify this idea as well. If I choose this path, how is it going to affect the story? How is it going to affect the genre? How is it going to affect the target audience, and so on and so forth? Because I think that's the most constructive way to go about it, because then you can, you get a far better idea of, of the validity of your idea without having to ask, permission of, is it okay to do this? So like I said, if the time and place that you set your story can affect, the target audience of, some people are very into the kind of more traditional, medieval Europe type of setting, and that's what they prefer because it's, it's kind of associated very strongly with the fantasy genre. Whereas urban fantasy is becoming pretty popular, and you may be able to get a wider demographic, since a lot of the, young adult urban fantasy seems to be getting more and more popular, pretty big audience. So you may decide, that you want to go towards that market, or you want to ride it towards a more traditional fantasy fan base. And you can, use the same thing. Well, if, people have asked, should I have a male protagonist? Should I have a female protagonist? Is it okay to have a female protagonist that's, is a lesbian or whatever, or she's of a certain race? And again, you can weigh the positives and negatives of making these choices. By gender, you may appeal to a certain audience where, some fans may want a traditional male protagonist. Some want anything but a traditional male protagonist. When you're developing like I said, if you're trying to be more, taking a path of being more realistic, or, adding elements of realism, the physical abilities of men and women are different. So this may completely change how you write your character. Unless you're, trying to, doing kind of a seinen, or not seinen, I said shonen manga, or manga and anime type thing, where you have, these crazy superpowers, which pretty much like a superhero, which overcome a lot of obstacles that, the average, man or woman wouldn't, that would, there'd be a differentiation between the two genders, kind of erases that, or levels the playing field when you have superpowers. But if you're trying to, do something that's more realistic, then, how your male protagonist, solves problems may very well be different than how your female protagonist solves problems. The society may look at them completely differently and how they treat them. So, I mean, you've just got to continue to build upon the idea that you have by asking yourself these questions. And that'll probably be the best way to kind of get to the point of finding out what kind of story you want to tell, because, some of the, the positives, may be, or I should say, some of the negatives may not be that, big of a negative if you choose to go a certain way, that it wouldn't really matter, and there's not going to be much of a backlash, and so on and so forth. So yeah, just formulate your questions in a, positives and negatives, cost benefit. If I go one way, how is this going to benefit the story, and what are the drawbacks going to be? What am I sacrificing if I go this way? With the idea, of what kind of story you want to tell ultimately. And, write that stuff down, keep a document, with these kind of questions, and like I said, formulate them in that way and answer them. And that, I think you'll save yourself a ton of time if you just stick with kind of a basic common sense approach. And you'll like I said, you can typically answer your own questions by doing that, as opposed to going online and having somebody give you a very generic answer. Because like I said, if you just merely ask, well, is this, what is my story a good idea? Well, first off, ideas are cheap. That's kind of a cliche saying, but they are. Their ideas are in the grand scheme of things of, creating and selling a product, they don't mean really much of anything, because you can have, a bunch of different people, basically taking the same idea. Some of them will fail to execute it in a meaningful way, and some will execute it in a meaningful way and become successful. So the idea in the beginning is, it's just a starting point. It really doesn't mean much. You have to build upon it and start to flesh it in and to get a basic idea of what it could become, and then decide, who you are going to market this to. What type of story are you going to tell? Are you going to tell a short story? Are you going to tell a long novel? A self-contained novel? Are you going to do a series? Are you going to do, a graphic novel? And like I said, even the choices for those, even with, and then point of view is another thing. This will all impact the audience that you're focusing on, and the type of, like I said, type of product you're creating. So, ask yourself these questions as you're going through your creative process, and you will most likely answer them without having to go online immediately and just ask advice. Because it is, like I said, as a pet peeve, it is really annoying to go onto a message forum and see, like half the posts of people, is it okay if I do this? Or, is this a good idea? Because you're just wasting people's time, and you're just showing that you're incredibly lazy in, doing the legwork yourself. My advice would be to, just have your story idea solidified to the point where, you can get, meaningful advice that isn't merely just, it depends, what's the context, and then because you're basically, they're getting you to answer these questions anyway by proposing these, these questions in response to, what you're asking, and they're just, kind of leading you along the way to getting all this information anyway, which you could have done yourself. And like I said, the more you do that, the more likely you are to be quicker at it and better at it in the future. So you don't, like I said, again, need to waste your time asking millions of questions on message forums and so forth. So yeah, positives and negatives, costs and, benefits. That's the best way to weigh things out. And that way you can weed out what you want and what you don't want. And like I said, it'll give you a better understanding of, of storytelling in general. And if, like I said, also if you pay attention to what, what's being written in the market, and compare your ideas to established stories and books that have been written. You can go in and read, fan reviews and see what aspects of the story that fans really liked and what aspects that they hated. And then you can see, well, that author took, decided that this, and including this, the positives outweigh the negatives, but the fan reviews may, look like completely opposite. So it's hit and miss. And, like I said, you're not going to appeal to all fans. You're going to have a lot of detractors. Even if you're, when you're successful, you'll have, fans that really dig what you like, what you have written and like it a lot. And then you'll have people that, there's no way you're ever going to please them. So that's just part of it. But like I said, a lot of reviews will, at least good ones, will go into specifics on what the author included or omitted and how that affected the story, and how it affected their experience of when reading the story. So keep that in mind. Do the legwork, do the investigating yourself before you go onto a message forum. If you must go onto a message forum or a subreddit and start asking questions, have a little confidence in yourself, have a little, use your logical faculties and see if you can accomplish that on your own. And build your confidence up in being able to brainstorm without someone holding your hand. because you're eventually going to have to get that point anyway, so you might as well pursue that that goal mark sooner rather than later. But yeah, that's it for this video. I'll be coming out with another video today as well. I'll get them both posted, and hopefully you'll enjoy them. I hope everybody's having a great day, and I'll talk to you later. Take it easy.